Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my hands-on first looks review of the Canon EOS R6, an upper mid-range full-frame mirrorless camera with 20 megapixels, 4K 60p video, built-in stabilization, bursts up to 20 frames per second, and a fully articulated touchscreen. Announced in July 2020, alongside the higher-end EOS R5, it'll cost $2,500 or pounds when it goes on sale in August, and while it lacks some headline grabbers from the flagship model, it actually shares a number of core features. Canon let me try out a pre-production R6 for this hands-on first looks review. As an early sample, I can't yet post images or movies taken with the camera, but in this video I will show you around it, demonstrate a bunch of features in practice, as well as confirming and quashing a bunch of rumours. Remember, this video is based on actually using the camera in person, as well as having extensive briefings with Canon. As always, I'll link to my final review of a production model here when it's ready, and if you're interested in my hands-on experiences with the higher-end R5, do check out my video all about that. Right, let's get started. As you already know, Canon launched the R6 alongside the higher-end R5 seen here on the right. Physically, the R6 on the left has a magnesium alloy chassis with a polycarbonate exterior versus magnesium alloy for the chassis and body on the R5. This makes the R6 slightly lighter, and Canon describes both as being weather and dust resistant, but to different levels. The R6 is equivalent to the 6D Mark II versus the 5D level of sealing on the R5. You'll also notice some control differences on the top, which I'll cover in a moment. But both models have a bunch of core features in common, including built-in stabilization with up to 8 stops of compensation, 12 frames per second mechanical or 20 frames per second electronic bursts, uncropped 4K video up to 60p and in 10-bit with dual pixel autofocus, fully articulated screens, joysticks and dual card slots, albeit twin SD on the R6 versus SD and CF Express on the R5. If you're interested in the EOS R5, do check out my separate hands-on video all about it, but in the meantime, that model has a 45 megapixel sensor and costs $3,899 or 4,199 British pounds. Oh, and for scale, here's the Sony A7III on the left next to the R5 on the right. Sorry, I don't have a clip showing the R6 with the Sony, but the two Canons are pretty similar when viewed from the front. Personally speaking, I found both Canon bodies more comfortable than the Sony, with better controls and user interfaces too, but again, that's a personal choice. Okay, now for the R6 in more detail, starting with the top panel where it really differs from the R5. There's no top screen or mode button here, with Canon instead opting for a simple mode dial, more in line with its entry to mid-range bodies. From the rear though, the R6 and R5 look very similar, and I'm pleased to say the more affordable model still sports an AF joystick and thumb wheel, so that's 3 control dials just like the R5. The screen on the R6 is a little smaller, 3-inch 1.62 million dot versus 3.2-inch 2.1 million dot on the R5, but most importantly it remains side-hinged and fully articulated with the same excellent touchscreen interface, 2 aspects where Canon continues to enjoy a lead over Sony, although I do appreciate that some people prefer screens that only tilt vertically. For me though, the side hinge doesn't just allow the screen to face forward, but also means I can compose comfortably high or low whether shooting in the landscape or portrait orientation. The viewfinder on the R6 uses a 3.69 million dot OLED panel with 0.76 times magnification. That's lower resolution than the 5.69 million dot viewfinder on the R6, but it matches the original EOS R while also doubling the refresh rate to 120 frames per second. Plus, it remains more detailed than the Sony A7III's viewfinder. Interestingly, the R6 viewfinder panel may also be a little less power hungry than the R5's and partly responsible for the few extra shots you get per charge. And here's the new LP-E6NH battery that Canon's developed for the R5 and R6, the same size as and backwards compatible with the older LP-E6N, but sporting around 15% longer life. Canon's quoting 510 shots per charge with the screen, or 380 with the viewfinder, a handful more than the R5 manages. In comparison, Sony quotes 710 shots on the A7 III with the screen, or 610 with the viewfinder, so if you are going with the Canon, I would recommend bringing a spare battery. Or for longer life, how about the new BG R10 grip? This works on both the R5 and the R6, it takes 2 battery packs and provides additional portrait controls. When attached to the camera, you can also charge both batteries within it over USB-C. Speaking of ports, the R6 is a bit simpler than the R5 but still covers the essentials. There's 3.5mm microphone and headphone jacks, USB-C and micro HDMI ports, along with an E3 type remote terminal. So the R6 misses out on the N3 remote port of the R5 and its PC Sync port for external lighting. Meanwhile, the USB-C port runs at 3.1 Gen 2 speeds and can be used for charging and operation with a compatible power delivery source. And it's interesting to see Canon switch from mini to micro HDMI, which do you prefer? You should also be able to use the R6 as a webcam over HDMI up to 4K, or directly over USB-C using Canon USA's beta plugin for Windows. Canon's also learned from previous mistakes and fitted the R6 with twin memory card slots, this time dual SD UHS-2 versus SD and CF Express on the R5. Now, CF Express was necessary on the R5 to support 8K RAW and 4K 120, but in their absence on the R6, that model can get away with SD cards only, which may actually be preferred by some photographers. Sadly, unlike the R5 though, it's not possible to record video to both cards simultaneously, but you can use them to back up photos as you shoot. Okay, now onto the sensor, a 20 megapixel full framer that's based on the one in the 1DX Mark III DSLR, but now with a different low pass filter and able to support dual pixel autofocus on uncropped 4K 60p video. Remember, the 1DX Mark III made you choose between a crop or manual focus when filming 4K at 60p. As a quick aside, you'll notice the shutter curtains closed when powered down, like the EOS R, but unlike the RP, not to mention most other mirrorless cameras which leave their sensors visible. On the R5 and R6, you can now choose whether the shutter is left open or closed at power off. When closed, it keeps dust from the sensor, but remember the shutter curtains are actually more delicate and easy to damage than the sensor with its protective filter, so the choice is yours. Moving on to photo quality, the R6 captures images with 5472 by 3648 pixels versus 8192 by 5464 on the R5, and you can choose to record any combination of JPEG and 14-bit RAW files, with compressed RAW also available. As first seen on the 1DX Mark III, you can also enable HDR-PQ to switch the JPEGs to 10-bit HIF format if preferred, and I've got a separate video all about how Canon implements HIF. Both the R5 and R6 are fast shooters, able to fire off long bursts at 12 frames per second using their mechanical shutters, 2 more than most Sonys, and here's how it sounds. Canon quotes 1000 JPEG or 240 RAW images on the R6. There's also silent shooting with an electronic shutter up to 20 frames per second with autofocus, although I can't yet comment on rolling shutter. The R5 and R6 become Canon's first interchangeable lens cameras with built-in sensor shift stabilization, or IBIS for short, and the company is making ambitious claims with up to 8 stops of compensation depending on the lens. It automatically works alongside optical stabilization on RF and EF lenses that are fitted with IS, but don't always assume that these will deliver superior results than unstabilized lenses. The unstabilized RF 50mm 1.2 supports 7 stops of compensation, while the RF 2870 f2 claims the maximum 8, both due to their imaging circles. To illustrate the effect of IBIS on an unstabilized lens, I've fitted a pre-production R5 with the RF 50mm 1.2. Remember that the performance is going to be similar to the R6. First, here's the view without any stabilization, where my handheld wobbles are quite apparent. And then in the menu, I'll enable the IS mode. And now, after returning to live view, just look at how much more stable it is. You can also see the servo autofocus refocusing easily as I move the camera back and forth. Now, this is a pre-production body and it may improve further on final models, but I was still very impressed by the IBIS on both the R5 and the R6, and it transforms the use of unstabilized lenses for both photos and video. Canon's also improved the autofocus capabilities of the R5 and R6 enough to now refer to them as dual pixel AF2. The coverage is 100% across the frame. It'll work down to light levels of -6 EV on the R5 or -6.5 EV on the R6, as long as you fit them with an f1.2 lens, and here you can get an idea of speed when using the RF 50mm 1.2. Again, I filmed this on the R5, but the performance should be similar to the R6, and again it may improve with final models. Face and eye detection have also both been improved, with the R5 and R6 able to recognise and track eyes from much further away, as seen in this clip that I filmed with the R6 using the RF 24 to 105mm STM zoom. That's likely to be the kit zoom for this model. Now, I'll need to do further comparisons, but I'd say it's looking pretty much as good as Sony here. Animal eye detection is also available and works with dogs, cats and birds, even birds in flight, which is something I look forward to testing with Brighton seagulls. And now to movies, with the EOS R6 able to film uncropped 1080 or 4K video from 24 to 60p with dual pixel autofocus and for up to half-hour clips. You can also record 10-bit internally or over HDMI using C-Log1 for grading later, but unlike the R5 there's no internal RAW. I wonder if Canon may add it over HDMI in the future. Technically speaking, while 1080 video on the R6 genuinely uses the full sensor width, the 4K modes actually start with the wider DCI shape before then cropping it very slightly into 16:9 UHD for recording. So like the 1DX Mark III, the R6's 4K UHD actually incurs a really small 1.06 times crop. Now to all intents and purposes, I'm happy to describe this as full frame, but I just wanted to be clear here. Unlike the R5, all video is recorded in the 16:9 shape on the R6, with DCI not being available. The higher end R5 also supports 8K, whether compressed or in RAW, as well as 4K at 120p. Those are the main differences. Now the R6 may not support 4K at 120p, but it will do 1080 at 100 or 120p, something the R5 is currently unable to capture. Like the R5, you get autofocus during these high frame rate videos, and the clips last up to 7.5 minutes, but there's no sound, and the clips are automatically slowed in camera by 4 times for playback. While the R6's movie capabilities are unsurprisingly overshadowed by the R5, it's important to remember it'll still record uncropped 4K up to 60p in 10-bit with confident autofocus, something that remains a challenge for most rivals, and like the R5, Canon's even finally included zebra patterns to better judge exposures. And that's all I can say until I've fully tested the final production model, but right now the EOS R6 is looking like a very desirable camera. The resolution may be slightly lower than the 24 megapixel norm at this level, but based on the 1DX Mark III sensor, its high ISO performance has the potential to be excellent. And besides, have you ever heard anybody complain about the image quality on the 1DX Mark III? The video may be lacking 8K RAW and 4K 120 from the R5, but there's nothing shabby about uncropped 4K at 60p in 10-bit with autofocus and for half-hour clips. It's a fast shooter too, both in terms of burst shooting at 12 or 20 frames per second and in terms of the autofocus, both greatly improved over the original EOS R and RP. Refreshingly, there's few, if any, of the usual caveats we've come to dread with some Canon launches. Sure, the battery life may not be the best around, but there's no weird new controls, with Canon instead wisely favouring a traditional AF joystick and rear thumb wheel. There's also twin card slots, jacks for mics and headphones, 24p video, no restrictions on autofocus or crops for movies, and the articulated screen remains present and correct. The icing on the cake is not just the final inclusion of built-in stabilization, but the fact it's already looking more effective than some rivals. The biggest issue is Sony's A7 Mark III, which impressively remains a key rival over 2 years after its original launch. Now, it may not film 4K beyond 30p, but that's plenty for most people, and it roughly matches the other key specifications, including fast bursts, great autofocus, twin card slots and built-in stabilization, as well as having slightly higher resolution stills and longer battery life. Sony gives you all of this for $500 less at the time of the R6 launch, and I wouldn't be surprised if it starts discounting further. But having spoken to a lot of Canon owners, Sony shouldn't underestimate the number of people who really want a side hinge screen and what they personally believe to be preferable processing on photos and video. Combine these with a more detailed viewfinder and Canon's superior user interface, as well as the bonus of 10-bit 4K at 60p, and many could be tempted by the R6 over the A7III, even at a higher RRP. Either way, Canon's not only finally caught up with Sony, but overtaken it, at least until we learn what rivals are coming in the future. Ultimately, the R5 may grab the headlines, but the R6 delivers most of what everyone wants at a much more affordable price. I reckon it'll be a big seller. Well, that's what I think. How about you? Is the R6 preferable to the R5? Has Canon left anything crucial out? Are there any deal breakers or gotchas? Let me know in the comments, and as always, look out for my final review, linked here when it's ready, plus of course my review of the R5 and other RF lenses. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.